Hello there folks, and welcome to another video for this week. This one is a little bit different from what we've been looking at recently, as I thought it would be really fun to dive into something that I absolutely love. And I basically just wanted to say that I think Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay is probably my favourite role-playing system. And I was just going to go through why, really. So this is the newest book from Cubicle 7. There's been a whole host of editions of the game. This is the 4th edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and it's the one that I'm playing right now and absolutely loving at the moment. I've been playing as a dwarf troll slayer called Gunnar Hrolfsson, based on the start set that you can get for the game, that I've now kind of made my own as a character and stuff, which is pretty awesome. But my journey with Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay actually started a long time ago, back when I was still in secondary school, which is sort of high school for Americans and stuff. So I went back, not to 2nd edition, but to 1st edition. And we'll get to this starter set in a second as well. So 1st edition, a lot of people will be familiar with different versions of this book. I had the big floppy paperback version of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and in actual fact we played so much of this that me and my brother both picked up our own copies of this. So I actually have another copy of this old 1st edition rulebook sitting somewhere in my parents' house, I think. And this was really my first introduction to proper role-playing at the tabletop, and what a hell of an introduction to role-playing. One of the interesting things about Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay is that a lot of people be quite familiar with Dungeons and Dragons and the D20 system, and a lot of people will have potentially started there. And I did a fair amount of roleplay with D&D with a couple of friends. We'd sort of played around, and we didn't really know what we were doing with the rules and stuff. But our first proper campaign came out of the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, mainly because we set up a Warhammer club at school, and when it came to like a couple of sessions into it, I think it was our teacher at the time, or maybe it was my friend Tom. I think he was talking about this role-playing game and how good it was, and so we dived in and played through like an introductory scenario of this, and it was so different from what we'd done before. But it was all set in the world of Warhammer, and we absolutely loved Warhammer and the old world and stuff. And so diving into this was just an amazing way to get our fill of the old world in a different way that didn't need us to have mountains and mountains of different models. And it also featured gorgeous artwork and all sorts of different things in it as well, which is really nice. So what's the thing that sets this apart from sort of your classic Dungeons and Dragons? Well, one of the interesting things, let's just flick through the book actually. So one of the interesting things about this game is that it's not a game of like mighty heroes. Sure, you could end up being something like a dwarf slayer, or you could be an iron breaker, or a mercenary or something like that. But in actual fact, a lot of the focus of the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay was that you were just essentially playing a lot of effectively kind of normal people who ended up getting dragged into the adventures of the Warhammer Old World. You could start off as someone like a footpad or a fisherman, like literally a fisherman, or a grave robber, a gamekeeper, an entertainer, an engineer, a slayer. And you would pick this career, and this is what you would play as during your games. So, there's the old classic troll slayer from back in the day. We got things like a woodsman or a wizard's apprentice and all that kind of thing. And you'd essentially dive in, and you'd be plucked from obscurity within the world of Warhammer, and you'd be forced to go off on these quests and these missions that had sort of effectively fell into your lap, really. So it was immediately fascinating to see a game which moved from the ultimate like heroic fantasy of Dungeons and Dragons, where you were, you were something, but then you became an adventurer, into this game where essentially you were normal people, in air quotes, who found themselves forced into, oh man, such great artwork and stuff in this, forced into adversity and things, and you have to fight your way through the old world against all sorts of different strange creatures, werewolves, wyverns, swarms of rats, giant spiders, scorpions, sand clams, of course. The varied breadth and depth of the old world, as it were, and against all the sorts of different strange creatures that you'd fight, like troglodytes and warriors of chaos, classic orcs, the Skaven, the undead, ogres, and everything else in between. And this is what made Warhammer Fantasy so incredibly different from what you were playing in Dungeons and Dragons and such, because you were diving in and yeah, you had classic fantasy trappings like wizards and all that kind of thing, but you were basically trying to survive rather than actually just rather than sort of planning to be like great lords and ladies of the land and all that kind of thing. So one of the other good things, the other nice thing about this game is that it ran off and this is something you can do because it's a soft pack, is it ran off this D100 system. So in Dungeons and Dragons, you roll a D20 and you add your bonuses and stuff. In Warhammer Fantasy Role-Play, you actually had a scheme that was based on a D100. So you roll a D100 when you were rolling for something. Let's see if we can find a profile for a creature, which would be a good example. There we go. So say you were rolling for the damage of rolling to hit something, you'd roll under your weapon skill, and you'd have to roll under that, and that would be where that would mark whether or not you'd hit or missed. You had strength and toughness, you had wounds, you had initiative. You had a lot of things that were very familiar to people who'd played Warhammer in there. So the stat line, at least that first bit up until about attacks, is very similar to what you'd have in Warhammer, really. And so it was something that you could easily latch onto. The other thing that was really nice about the game is that it had variants of degrees of success and failure. One of the things that was interesting about Warhammer, about D&D, was that it was very binary in that sense. So say you rolled to hit, if you didn't get your success, then, well, you didn't hit. Whereas in Warhammer Fantasy Role-Play, you could see variants of degrees and depth in terms of attacking and failing, like how well did you succeed, how well did you fail, how much did you fail by, and all that kind of thing. And then that depth was added into the brutality of the combat that you had as well. So when you dived into the game, things died very quickly in this, and it was very much a brutal system. One of the things that I think we never really cottoned onto is these modifiers. So there was this idea that your weapon skill could be 25, which meant that you actually not going to be hitting very much. But as you started to gain advantages in combat, you'd get bonuses, and then if you were winning, you'd get bonuses and all that kind of thing. And weapons would give you special abilities and all that kind of thing. So it was a lot more in depth than your classic D&D adventure. You'd also have benefits and all sorts of different things when it came to striking people and different types of creatures and all that kind of thing as well. So, but there was a lot of hidden depth to Warhammer Fantasy Role-Play that was then carried through into, their masses of skills and talents that they had for different characters and all that kind of thing as well, which was really fascinating. I mean, look at the list of skills and stuff that people would have when it came to, playing as characters. Like, you'd have all these different things that, like, in some cases, you couldn't even read and write because this was a grimdark world. The other thing that everyone really liked about Warhammer Fantasy Role-Play, it was something that I absolutely loved, was the brutality of combat and kind of death and stuff in the game. So in the game, you took damage as you would normally do, so you took health points. But when you do big, nasty hits that would cause a lot of damage, you can look for sort of critical hits, essentially, and they'd be applied to different areas of the body, depending on what you rolled, and that could do nasty, terrible things. So let's read 15 on the arm. Your blow destroys your opponent's shoulder joint almost totally. The arm hangs limply, a mass of tattered and pulpy flesh with protruding fragments of bone. By chance, one of the blown splinters has severed a major artery, and after a fraction of a second, your opponent collapses. with blood pouring out from the ruins of his shoulder. Death from shock and bloodlust is almost instantaneous. Let's look at this one. There's 16 on a head. Your opponent's head flies off in a random direction, landing 2d6 feet away. Your opponent is concussed and may do nothing for d4 hours or until medical attention is obtained. So it was definitely one of those games where things could change on a knife edge and you could end up being absolutely brutalized over the course of your adventures. And you'd go from, I'm just a fisherman, to turning into some crazy adventurer like Gotrek or Felix or something, who'd managed to sort of work their way out of obscurity and become one of the legends of the old world, which I thought was always awesome. So you had a lot of stuff in here that was, focused around the gods and stuff like that. So you had the ability to be priests and Templars and things like that. You have access to all the different gods. So you've even got the Chaos gods in there as well, which is kind of cool. And you had a bestiary of all sorts of different things too. The other thing that was really nice about Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay is that even though that book was thick, everything was in one place. So you were diving in and you were picking this book up for, let's see how much it's retailed for back in the day. I don't know, it's even going to say, is it going to say how much this was? Back then, I think we paid £20-30 for this. Maybe. Who knows? But anyway, so this was, I think I got this from Wayland's Forge in Birmingham, I think it was. But yeah, we got this, and that was essentially all you needed. That was it. It was great. So we played through a massive, huge campaign of this. It was the first time that I ever experienced like a character dying and all that kind of stuff. But it was a really awesome experience. And so obviously when the second edition came out, so this one was from, I think it was Black Industries at the time. Yeah, Black Industries. Although Green Ronin helped with this as well, as you can see there. This was the logical next step for us, and it essentially became the focus of possibly one of our biggest and most long-running campaigns that we ever did in roleplay. So there's actually a starter scenario in the back of this book. I'll show off actually some of those. So there's a starter scenario here somewhere, I think. Yeah, here we go. So this starter scenario was taken Granny Mosher. So this was what my friend ran as our introductory adventure. We played characters in this, and then we actually carried that through all the way until the end, over months and months and months and things like that. And a lot of the stuff with the second edition more or less stayed the same. They just did a lot of sort of tightening up. I mean, you'll see that they've drastically lowered the page count of the book, which is interesting. But obviously this was the first one that came suddenly in colour. They tightened up a lot of the core rules. They made a lot more work. They did a lot more work on the different characters and things like that, and threw a bunch of interesting elements into there. But there was still plenty of things that you could dive into and have fun with. There is still the eponymous. I wonder if they can find like the wonderful character that everyone is always obsessed with when it comes to Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, is when you get told that you can be like a rat catcher. I just need to remember my ABCs, don't I, really? It's the other side. But anyway, so a lot of the stuff that was done in this was similar to what we'd seen before in first edition, although, again, they sort of tightened up the rules. I don't remember enough about this to kind of go too much into detail with what it was all about, but I remember having a lot of fun with it and it being super interesting. I think I played a soldier in this who turned into a priest, and I had I really wanted to be like a warrior priest in the end. We didn't get that far, unfortunately, but I did. There we go, the eponymous rag catcher, who came with, let me see if I can get it. So I got him in his trappings. A small but vicious dog. That has carried through into the 4th edition, which is so amazing. Again, this was a game that was based on the percentile, so they didn't change anything in that regard. You still made characters that came from sort of obscurity and delved into adventures off the back of something terrible happening to them more often than not. It is the grimdark after all. You had all these big talents and skills added into the mix as well, so they all had special abilities. So again, it was a lot more in depth than what you've been doing before, and so you had to keep a really good eye on all of this. The other interesting thing was that, it's one of the things that I'll give D&D credit for, is that they have everything you need in the monster's entry. But in this, like, it just has all their skills. And so you have to be like, okay, so I know that Skaven have, let's see, concealment, outdoor survival, perception, scale, sheer surface, silent move, speak language, quiquish, specialist weapon group, sling, and swim. Okay, so I now need to go and remember all of that and look that up and add that to my collection. So, it was something that was a lot of in-depth work for the games master, the storyteller, but I think it added to the awesomeness of the game and kind of where you could take it and how you could kind of bodge it in a way, which was always nice. But anyway, so you were diving into the game, still playing as kind of heroes that ended up having to kind of fight for their lives, essentially. They kind of built on things a little way with the actions you could do and stuff, which was quite interesting. They had a lot of the stuff that was still bonus based, and you still rolled for location, and you rolled for damage, and you had critical weapons. They threw in the Ulrich's Fury, which was kind of cool. So Ulrich's Fury was this thing where when you rolled for damage, if you rolled a 10 on a D10, so this is where they sort of started to solidify things here into the D100, D10 system. If you rolled a 10 on a D10, you'd roll it again, and you'd be able to do even more damage and things like that. And that was again tied into critical hits and how all that worked as well. And you had bleeding and all that kind of stuff too in there. It wasn't necessarily the quickest system, but I think it was one that was very much appreciated by players. And I think the second edition, I think the first edition was the one that was the most lauded and set the groundwork for a lot of stuff. But you can tell that it was very much a not broken, don't fix it kind of thing, because they didn't necessarily change too much when it came to second edition, really. And I really enjoyed it, and I had a lot of fun playing this game as my soldier character turned initiate. It was really fun in this game. In this, we had an elf called Erdefine, who was played by one of my friends. And then we had a couple of dwarves, which is Snorri and Ergrim, who were my brother and another one of my friends. And they played cousins, and they were like a proper cantankerous dwarven family. And they were like, you can't laugh at him, I'm the only one who's allowed to laugh at him, and all that kind of stuff. It was very funny. And then I was playing the human soldier in that group, which is pretty cool. I did try and revisit second edition with some of my friends and things recently, but not recently, but in the last few years, but it didn't go down necessarily too well. But I think it was because a lot of the time we were playing with rules that we didn't necessarily understand, or we kind of like half remembered how the game worked, which was always interesting. Let's have a look at. So here's one of the sample characters that I made. So this was going to be one of my dwarf shield breaker characters. Gottfried Dimzad was his name, and as you can see, you've got the different ways that. So his weapon skill is 47. And he can, so when you'd roll to attack, you'd roll 4700 would be a hit. You'd obviously get the bonuses and all that kind of thing as well. You also had all your skills and everything like that you would have learned. So you'd have to you would probably fill all of this in, if you were trying to do it properly. But here's like a brief breakdown of the skills and the talents that you had as well, which was really fascinating. So +1 to damage rolls, +10 to navigation. It wasn't so much that it was massively overwhelming, but it was a lot more work for the DM than normal. So yeah, there's a little breakdown of kind of like a character and how all that works, sort of movement and everything there. I think one of the things that they did in second edition was really nice is that they kind of tried to throw in more mitigation. So you had the addition of like bonuses and things to your skills as you became trained in them. You had all your talents that would aid you as well. They kind of turned things so that it was very much a game where when you said you wanted to do something, the way that you described it would engender the goodwill or bad will, essentially, or ill will of the GM. So if you dived in and were like, right, well, I would love to talk to this guy, but I'm going to do it while kind of give him some beer or something like that. Then your GM, your storyteller, will be like, cool, so we'll let you do a fellowship test, but we'll do it with +20 to your roll or something like that. And it was done in such a way that it meant that it wasn't so much of a, it wasn't so terrible for you to be failing all the time or anything like that. But I think the degrees of failure were still very much there, and I still quite enjoyed that. It wasn't as massive a thing as it was when we moved into when they moved into 4th edition, where they made it a much bigger thing. But I think they had enough in here to keep people interested in enjoying it and stuff like that, which was always cool. This was where you got your fate and fortune points is another really nice thing. So every character had like a reserve of these, and fate could be used to get yourselves out of like the most terrible of situations, but fortune points could be spent to kind of change things for the better. So here we go. Like character can spend a fortune point to gain an extra parry or dodge. Can spend a fortune point to gain an extra D10 on the initiative roll in order to go quicker. And your fortune points would kind of like stack back up to your fate. But your fate was there if things went terribly, terribly wrong and you're about to die or something. You could spend a fate point and all that kind of thing. The other thing that was really nice about the Warhammer world as well is that it just had so much stuff in it that was so Warhammer. So you've got disease, you had corruption of the mind and all that kind of thing, and being twisted by the dark gods and everything else in between. So it was very much one of those games where just awful things happened to you all the time and you were just trying to survive, which I thought was always kind of interesting. The other interesting thing as well is that the game was one where, like, when it came to the enemies and stuff that you were fighting against, there was no like hard and fast rule for like how many Skaven you should put against somebody or how many pickpockets. So it was very much like one of those games where the characters would have to really think about how they were going to engage with things. I mean, obviously they knew that a beastman was terrifying. I mean, look at it, it's freaking awful. Toughness bonus of 4, which means it's going to soak a bunch of damage and all that kind of thing. And it might be wearing armor and all that kind of thing as well. And so do you just attack the beastmen head on? Well, you probably do if you're a slayer, but if you're a regular Joe or something, you might want to dive in and think about how you approach these combats in different ways, and maybe, work out interesting solutions for defeating your foes. And so there was always this interesting thing in the game of trying to put more onus on the players to think of interesting and fun ways for them to approach different situations and things like that. But yeah, 2nd edition was a lot of fun, and it was probably my longest running campaign that we ever played, apart from maybe my Dragon Age campaign. But I think Warhammer Fantasy Role-Play 2nd edition was bloody lovely, and we really enjoyed playing it, especially starting out from that kind of intro scenario in the book. But yeah, so yes, 2nd edition. The next step for me was coming back years later with Cubicle 7's Warhammer Fantasy Role-Play 4th edition. So 4th edition, apart from just looking bloody lovely, thanks to the folks at Cubicle 7, who are masters of what they do. They put so much effort into their games. A lot of the DNA of 1st and 2nd edition is still here. You might be thinking to yourself, well, where's 3rd edition? Well, 3rd edition was done by Fantasy Flight Games, and it was pretty bad. They very much changed the essence of what Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay was, and so it was one of those games which kind of sort of fell off the radar for a lot of people. I mean, I didn't play it. We went and played Dragon Age and all sorts of different things. It also felt prohibitively expensive with the big box and all the tokens and the widgets and all that kind of thing as well. So it was something that we didn't necessarily dive into. The thing that was really nice about what they did with 4th edition, especially when it came to careers, is they did this career path thing. So you could change careers and you could go off in different directions when it came to Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay in the past. Like, you could go from being a grave robber to a tomb ranger or something like that, but sometimes they'd be very split up, whereas in this they kind of built it into so you wouldn't necessarily have to go from being a grave robber and now I want to be an outlaw and then I want to be a soldier and then I'll be a warrior priest or something. You could literally stay in your career as a grave robber and just go from the very basics of being a body snatcher all the way up to being a treasure hunter at the very high end of things. They also made it so your advanced scheme was different as well. So, for example, here you can see they kind of signified what you have to level up to begin with, and then and sort of your basics ones there, and then through all the way through up to the gold level at the end of being a treasure hunter, which was kind of cool. So there's your starting things you need to upgrade and things like that. You still have all of your skills, you still have all of your talents, you still have loads of trappings, you still have lots of numbers in the game. It's definitely one of those games that isn't for the faint-hearted when it comes to a little bit of maths, but it's definitely one that was packed with interesting sort of directions for you to go when it came to gameplay and things on the tabletop. The thing that was really nice about what Cubicle 7 did with the career system and the roleplay in general, though, is that I think they really tied it into the idea of what's the best way of they tied it into the idea of it being more than just this sort of continuing D&D style adventure where you go from day to day to week to month to month. There was very much an emphasis on your downtime and your character living their life as well as them doing their adventuring. So a little bit like with like the Lord of the Rings, for example. Bilbo doesn't go adventuring every single day of every single month of the year or whatever. Sometimes he's sitting down and reading books or writing and all that kind of thing. So in this game there was very much an emphasis on the sort of passage of time and the changing of characters. So, for example, you could start, you might go on an adventure as a novitiate, and by the time you get to the end of it, you've leveled up, but then you go off on your downtime and you learn to be a warrior priest by studying in the seminary, and then you join up with your friends again later on down the line in order to continue your story and tell new adventures, but you can kind of be like, I've lived my life as an apothecary. So your career path isn't necessarily something that just sort of sits there and kind of informs how you are, but it's just essentially a big book of skills. It was something that was intrinsic to your character. So someone who rolled an innkeeper or a merchant or an investigator or, an advisor or a watchman would go back to being that at some point in their career. And so there was a really interesting element to this that I kind of think took people in different directions and made you think differently about your characters. And it's something that I've seen built into a lot of other stuff that not only Cubicle 7 have done, but also other companies as well. So the One Ring has a lot of that as well, which is always quite nice to see. But yeah, I mean, the artwork is also beautiful for this game. The other thing that's really... the interesting thing about this game as well, it's something that I think is quite fun to dive into, is the kind of base mechanics of everything. So it uses the similar system to what you'll be familiar with. So it uses the standard kind of D100 system for rolling for attacks and stuff like that. But there are lots more nuances to everything. Let's see if I can find the gameplay section. I probably should have marked the book up, but that would be something that a professional would have done. And I'm not particularly one of those, am I? So let's go through. Blah, 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 blah. So you'd be fighting away. Here we go. Tests. Boom. That's combat difficulty. We don't need that. Boom, 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 boom. Rules. The basic rules. So when you're rolling to do something, you roll against your skill, and you see if you succeed or fail. Sometimes you will be rolling and it will be just a flat test, and it won't necessarily matter whether or not you succeeded by a lot or a little. That's fine, right? However, the other thing that was really interesting is that they added in these margins of success. So say your test was 55 and you rolled 22, right? Well, you take the tens of that and you compare it to your skill. So in that case, it would be 20 to 5, so 2 to 5, so that's 3. So you've succeeded by 3 levels, which means it's a success, a solid one, and that's brilliant. If you get more than that, so for example 4 or 5, it's a yes and. So you succeeded with your goal, but something else happened. And you could either have the Games Master do that, or you could be the one who comes up with an idea, and obviously you've got astounding success and that kind of thing. You've also got just failures. So, you did it, but something went. You did it, you just didn't do it. You did it, but something went wrong. You did it, but something terrible went wrong as you were diving into the game. So maybe you unlocked the door, but you absolutely caused a racket and you knocked over a bunch of pots or something on the other side. You've also got these, there's also this difficulty table, which was applied to everything, which again was a kind of upgrade to what we saw in first and second edition, which kind of added to the degrees of success and that kind of thing. So, if something is just really easy for someone who's a tomb robber opening a tomb door, it's probably going to be quite easy. So just plus 40 to it and see if you succeed in your test, which is always cool. This then flows into combat as well. So when you're doing combat, you can pair. So, for example, my Troll Slayer is hitting another character. You roll a d100 comparing against your melee basic skill. Say I succeed with 4 levels of success. They succeed. They don't get any successes. I win the combat because you compare your success levels to see who won. And then those success levels are then added to your combat damage and your weapon and all that kind of thing. You still have all of your hit locations and all that kind of good stuff. You can still parry and dodge and all that kind of things, which is really cool. The other thing that's really nice is that criticals have now been flipped onto a rolling a double, essentially. So when you're rolling and you get 22, 33, 11, all that kind of thing, you can trigger a critical hit, which makes it even more deadly. And this could mean that you could rip someone's arm off or cut their head off or something very, very quickly. And it can mean that combat, rather than it turning into a little bit of a slog, which sometimes it was, can be over very quickly and brutally at the same time, which is always nice to see. So one of the other things I was going to say, I really like the opposed test element to combat that they added, that you've got in 4th edition. That wasn't necessarily added, but I like that it's there because I think it builds on the drama of things, and there's this really interesting flow back and forth between succeeding in a fight and just having the advantage and things building up. But then if something goes wrong, suddenly it has this movie twist to things, and you'll be going, things go badly and start to, you can have your head chopped off or something like that. And one of the nice things about the kind of dueling system in the game is that if you're defending against an attack with an opposed test and say you roll a 22, sure, they might get through, but you also do a critical hit to them at the same time, which I think is really awesome. So it's got this really nice flow to combat that is still incredibly brutal, but it's one that is absolutely fascinating to play through. It does mean that combats take a little while, but combats are, in my opinion, few and far between in Warhammer, and they happen sometimes to punctuate the stories rather than become the core part of them, because it is so brutal, essentially. But for example, in our game, I'm playing a Troll Slayer, so I'm built for combat, really. But the other 2 companions that I have are a sort of roguish halfling who isn't particularly great at combat, and another kind of silver-tongued halfling who is really bad at combat. And so when we're not around our other character, Salundra, with her dual blades, things can go really badly very quickly. I mean, we fought a Chaos Spawn recently, and that was very much on the knife edge of how things would go. But it's definitely one of those games that doesn't hold your hand, and things can go badly very, very quickly. Which is always cool. There's lots of stuff in here as well for magic and all that kind of thing, and they've carried over everything that you could imagine from the original games as well. You've still got the kind of the interesting enemies and stuff in the game with their own special abilities and all that kind of stuff as well, which is really nice. And they've put some additional things in here for kind of tempering encounters and changing them and stuff, and sort of upgrading creatures and that kind of thing as well to help you out, which is always good to see. But it's possibly the most in-depth version of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay that I think they've done up to this time, that there's kind of fleshed out in a whole bunch of ways. The focus has very much been on the Reichland at the moment, but they've kind of expanded it a lot with a whole host of different expansion books and that kind of stuff as well. So it's not as simple as D&D or as Wrath and Glory, which is their 40k one at the moment, although Imperium Maledictum is coming. But I'd say that is possibly one of the most fun times I've ever had role-playing, simply because of the ethos behind the rules, the variance in it, the way that degrees of failure and success work, and also the focus on the background of the old world and making that sort of ingrained into the mechanics of the game is just absolutely fascinating. One of the nice things about what Cubicle 7 do as well is that, I mean, again, you could just buy this book, get some character sheets, build some characters, and away you go. But Cubicle 7 do these absolutely wonderful starter sets, which I kind of showed you earlier. So we'll move those over to the side. So this is the starter set for Warhammer Fantasy Role-Play. So this kind of gives you a quick... I'm just going to give you a slight unboxing of this. So this doesn't come with the bag. It comes with all these advantage tokens, which will be handy for combat. And you get a couple of dice as well, obviously. You get this nice back of the box thing, which is a little GM screen that you can put up, which has some of the things you're going to need to know in the game, which is really cool. Oh, they added things. They added resilience and resolve into the game as well, which is really nice. So there's some extra things that kind of help your characters and mitigate the bad luck that you might have. And then you have a whole host of really cool bits and pieces. As you can see, I have used this in the past. So the game comes with these pre-gens, which come in these really awesome folios. So they come with a breakdown of what it's like to be the character and how you should play them. But they also come with this really nice kind of basic version of the character. So you can see at a glance how they work and what they should do. And kind of like breakdowns of skills and traffic. This was one of the first big starter sets they did, or it might even be the first one, but I think they did an absolutely superb job on this to kind of give you a good entry point into the game. Kind of breaks down all the key things that you need to know as well. So even there's a lot of things to remember, I think they've done a really good job of playing around with the character and making it interesting for new people. You also get things like that are so good. Secrets, ties to the rest of the group, motivations. This is what I'm saying when I mean that, like, this is really good for role players who want that kind of thing. So you've got Salundra von Drakensberg there, Amris Emberfell, who's your elven merchant, Ferdinand Gruber, the human wizard, Elsie Sigloben, who's your witch hunter, Gunnar Hrolfsson, the dwarf slayer, the character that I ended up playing, and there's also another one in here somewhere. Where's she gone? Where's the halfling? There she is. And also the halfling, Morella Brandysnap. But the game also comes with a whole host of bits and pieces. So you get some like handouts and stuff. So this is your kind of what's on sale in Ubersreich. And you might remember Ubersreich from the Vermintide games, actually. So that'll be quite a nice thing. You also got all the handouts and rumours, breakdown of character skills and how they work, and a good reference sheet. There's also this helpful guide on difficulties and opposed tests and how they work, and simple tests. You've got this sort of entry point to how things all work, which is always good to have. You got maps of the Duchy of Ubersreich and beyond it, and Ubersreich itself there, the other way around. Clearly can't read maps as a character skill, but there you go. Had some really good fun in this. You've got your combat reference sheet as well, talking about how advantage works and fighting and how you can dodge and attack, and how turns work. You've got your critical hit table there as well, how you can heal up and stuff too. Another map breaks down things even more, and then a much bigger map of Ubersreich and the surrounding area. And then you have these two books. So the first of these books is the adventure book. And this is great because it not only comes with a really good starting adventure. I'm not going to say more than that. But it comes with some absolutely stunning characters that you can play as, who you will either absolutely hate or absolutely love. Maybe both. But it also comes with a really fun storyline that kind of concludes with a really epic finale and stuff. You also then get a series of additional adventures that can be run at the same time or after you've finished your adventures. So there's like a whodunit kind of thing, which is really fun. There's like a goblin invasion. There's stopping a party. There's like werewolves. There's dwarven engineers. There's a whole host of different things in here that are going to be really fun for you to use in your games. I used this one in particular, Old Blue Eyes, which is really fun. I really enjoyed that one. So there's lots of extra things in there that you can use, which would be fantastic to drop into your, well, get people started and see where it all went. Then, and there was no reason that they had to add this in, there was a huge, like, Gazette-style guide to Ubersreich and the surrounding area. So, say you're going to be exploring, the slums area of Ubersreich. Well, here's a whole host of information that you can use to sort of bulk out what you're doing. Tells you what all the taverns are and all that kind of thing. And there are lots of different interesting hooks in here for people who want to dive in and tell more stories in Ubersreich. I can't explain how much I have done with just this starter set. I have literally sat down and gone through this and played through the starting adventure and used this as the basis without even looking at the big main rulebook that we were looking at earlier or any other supplements for loads and loads of my storytelling. And even though I've played through it twice now, once as a storyteller and once as a player, I think it's one of the best entries into a role-playing game. And it gives you a really interesting look at how Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay works without throwing you in at the deep end. Like, it actually walks through, right, so you're going to do this first bit, which might be a little bit of a fight. So we'll work that out, which will be a good chance for you to use dramatic and opposed tests. And because everything's been done in such a really nice way, it's very quick and easy to get your head around things before you dive into what could be a much more hefty sort of session or two once you start making your own characters and that kind of thing as well. I would heartily recommend picking up this starter set if anything that I've said at the moment has kind of engendered you to why Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay is so fun. It gets the Warhammer world perfectly, especially in this new edition, and comes with so much depth and granularity that it will make you have an amazing time when it comes to role-playing as much as combat. The puzzle of combat in this game is quite fun once you get the hang of it. I wouldn't say that it's quick, but it's quite fun. And then the opportunities for role-play and where you can take things and stuff like that is second to none based on the mechanics and the degrees of failure and success and that kind of thing as well. And it's very player-led, very player agency focused and that kind of thing. And it's a joy to play in this world. So if you're someone who's been looking at like D&D or Pathfinder and thinking about looking for alternatives, I would heartily recommend having a look at Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. I mean, as I say, I've been going through the various editions of the game for as long as I can remember, starting from when I was like 11, 12, 13 years old, making characters and enjoying the game. And now, boom, 4th edition, here we are. It's been a long discussion, but I thought it was worth having a little bit of a love letter to Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay on this channel. And I absolutely love how they mirrored the 1st edition book with the 4th one. I think that's wonderful. Really, really cool. But yes, there we go. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. 3 editions I've played. 3 editions I've loved. Countless adventures. Countless characters. Mighty stories being told, and many more to go, I would hope, as well. If you're interested in learning more about Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, I'd love to talk a little bit more about it on the channel and all that kind of thing. Maybe dive into what Cubicle 7 have got set up for everyone to explore once they've played through those first adventures, perhaps. Maybe you want to learn a little bit more about 1st edition or 2nd edition and some of the stories or anything like that, but let me know. This video is already long enough. Hopefully you've been using this while you've been doing some painting or something, but I hope you've enjoyed this sort of dive into Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. And don't forget to do all that good stuff. Like, share, comment, subscribe, all that good awesomeness and that nonsense that you need for YouTube these days. And I'll see you in another video very soon. Don't forget to check out the Ko-fi link down below as well if you enjoy what I do. But yes, a love letter to Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay and what it means to me. And hopefully this will inspire some of you to go and check out some of these adventures for yourself. I'm going to head on. I hope you've enjoyed this one. I'll be back soon. Bye.